So I know I'm going to forget to say this at the end, so I'm going to say it now. I do work for Deloitte, and I do thank them very much for giving us the building. And the department I work for is always hiring. So if at the end of this presentation you still like me and think I'm an interesting person, and you're interested in what we do, I'd love to chat with you. So I'm easy to find on the web and through Twitter, etc., etc. And I'll certainly be hanging around later to say hi. My talk definitely is towards the not-so-expert people. So if anyone gets really bored and wants to leave, I won't be at all offended. I might be a little wistful, but I won't be offended. Just walk out. It's arisen for me, I guess, what I'm talking about tonight, because of my own personal experience. I've moved around. I started in academia. I'm trained very classically trained as a physicist. Went through bespoke software development, and have come sort of now into analytics in a professional, sort of commercial capacity. And one thing I see that the analytics community, I think, could really borrow from the software development community is the rigor and discipline around things like structuring your code, modularizing your code, and using things like source control, which is why I'm talking about GitHub tonight. If all of that sounds so boring to you that you just do it every day and you want to leave, again, feel free. But that's where I'm coming from, so don't be offended if I'm saying some things that seem to you very, very obvious. So from that point of view, I guess I'm aiming it at that kind of person who's maybe heard about this stuff, wants to do it, doesn't quite know how to, and is just looking for, yeah, it sounds like a plan, but it also sounds kind of annoying and difficult, so how do I get started? And I'd like to point out that this is a picture of someone washing a cat, not of someone about to whirl a cat around the room by their arms. I just had, when I was practicing this talk, I got a bad reaction to this photo, so I just wanted to make sure. I guess a lot of people I come across in my professional practice feel like this when they're asked to be a little more rigorous around their coding, and certainly when they're asked to do something like commit source code to a repository where people will be able to check who changed what and see if the code still compiles, etc., etc. And they say, why would you do this? I'm not really here to convince you tonight as to why you would do it. I know why I do it and why I use this even in my personal practice when I'm not working with other people, partly because I've seen people lose their entire PhD thesis by accidentally not backing up. So that's why I strongly do use GitHub, even if I don't use it in the way that perhaps a fully fledged software development team would use it around commit history, etc., etc. I just think it's a fabulous way of always knowing that you backed it up instead of almost always knowing that you backed it up except when it mattered. What I really like about ProjectTemplate, I guess, and why I really decided a while ago to take it for a test run and thought it was worthwhile coming and talking to some other people about it, is it's really easy, I find, particularly because I dip in and out of analytics, so I do actual hands-on analytics and then I go out and do some strategy work and I come back in and go back and forth. And when you're tired and when things just need to be done really quickly, I find it's really easy to get sloppy and lazy, and that's when I know I need some guardrails around me to help me get back to being disciplined and get back to being careful. Also, I tend to put things down for several months and then have to pick them up in a hurry and sort of get going with them again. So all of those things push me towards wanting to be disciplined in the way I code and the way I structure, wanting to be disciplined around backups, and desperately needing somebody to help me with this because I don't work in a professional software development shop and I tend to do small projects and then put them down and pick them up again. So that's why I do it. The other reaction I get often when I tell people about this when I'm out consulting with clients is, yes, I want to do it too because I've come across these problems, but how? I'm not a software developer and I don't feel comfortable with these things. I've heard about Subversion and CVS and they all sound kind of hard, and I've heard that they corrupt your files and such, and I don't know how to get going. And I want to, but it always comes down to the fact that the GM wants it tomorrow and I just do it, and I just, don't perhaps be quite so tidy. So that's what I'm talking through tonight. It's just a guided introduction to the how, not the why, but the how. The guide rails I've found useful when I tried to do this myself is ProjectTemplate, which was put together by John Miles White, who's, I think he's just graduated PhD, and I don't know what he's going to go and do now. I get the impression he's not going to maintain ProjectTemplate, which is a little sad. But, and that's his website, his Twitter address, obviously, and he tweets with the hashtag of ProjectTemplate. There's quite an active Google group for ProjectTemplate too. I'm going to talk about Git and then the online repository for Git, which is GitHub. So I just really like Git. It's the only source control system that I find really easy to use, easy enough that I actually use it rather than just think about using it. Very sort of briefly touch on the project functionality of RStudio, and then built into ProjectTemplate is, I think, a beautiful thing, which is Heather Weckham's test that package in R. So I'm going to briefly talk about that as well. And I'll put all the slides of the talk up on GitHub, actually. So if anyone's interested, you guys can all look this up later. So that's it from a point of view of slides. I must admit that I'm actually going to do the right to the talk sitting down because I'm going to run it from the keyboard. So there we go. So it's going to be a little tricky to get things the right size, so bear with me. This has all gone off the screen. It all looked very beautiful when I was doing it upstairs. So this is John's site. Like I say, I'm not suggesting that anyone sort of build their lives around ProjectTemplate because I don't think it's something that John's necessarily going to maintain. But I think it helps me particularly, and perhaps you also, learn or just be a little bit more structured and adopt some things which I then think I can pretty much use on my own once I've learned how to do a lot of this stuff and taken use of some of the stuff he does. If he doesn't maintain it and it's not there forever, I'm not, I don't think that's a tragedy. So there's two things that I thought I would call to your attention. He has a great demo himself if you want to walk through it. It's not this, I haven't copied it, it isn't what I'm talking about tonight, so if you're interested in tonight you can then go and run through his stuff. But basically this is what he did it for, right? He did it because he did lots and lots of small analyses and wanted to bring more structure to the analysis. So it's basically, it's the framework around which you can build your stuff. And the other comment I quite liked of his is basically this idea that it's based on the idea that if you structure all your data analysis projects the same way, then you'll actually start to be able to pull things across and not write things 3 times and just have a little bit more reuse even in your own practice. So let's see if I can get this a nice size. Ooh, I did. All right. So I do tend to use RStudio. The only part of tonight's demo that depends on RStudio is the fact that I use its project functionality to hook into Git. So if you're not an RStudio user and you just want to do it from the command line, no issues. You just have to be a little bit more savvy around your use of Git. John Miles White doesn't like RStudio, so he didn't build ProjectTemplate to work with it. He just codes straight from Emacs, I understand. So, starting very basics, it is in the CRAN, and it is exactly what you would expect it to be called. So assuming I haven't lost my internet connection. I haven't. Excellent. Here we go. So, it's easy as, I guess I'll point out one thing. So that's just got my standard base packages in there. So nothing up my sleeves. I haven't been going around sticking funny things in here. It's as simple as loading the library, and I'm sure if you used this all the time and this wasn't your demo computer, which it is for me, you would build that into your path somehow so that you just have that library always loading. Now it points out to you that it's also loaded test that, and you can see in the project list that we have the package list, we have picked up both ProjectTemplate and the package test that. So he wraps that in and does it himself, brings that in. And then once you're there, it's just check I'm in the right working directory after all the flustering around with, yes I am. It's as simple as, okay, create project. And sure enough, over on my RStudio, I pop up a new folder called Melbourne Demo. This tells you exactly the same thing as we have here around the full project layout. He also has a cut down project layout, and I unfortunately find that for me, I'm right in the middle. I don't use all the functionality of the full project, but there are a number of things missing from the cut down project that I do use. So I just end up having some folders sitting around that aren't particularly useful to me. So I'm going to walk through a bunch of these folders tonight. I'm not going to go so much into diagnostics, profiling and logs, because a lot of that is more around if you're really writing code that's doing something quite significant and has to run fast and you're trying to optimize it. I don't write code like that. I wish I did, but I don't. So I haven't got into using those, and therefore I'm not talking about them or demonstrating them tonight. So we've got our project structure set up. The next thing I want to do is I want to hook into Git. The easiest way to do that is actually to go and use the RStudio projects functionality, which is nicely described, if you're interested, on the RStudio website. But it's very simple. You go up to this nice button up here and say, I want to create a project. I want to create it from an existing directory. What I quite like about it, I must admit, I use the projects functionality in order to hook up to Git and for no other particular reason. But I do quite like the way it does help you tidy things up. So it's cleared out my workspace, and if I had already saved this workspace, it would have loaded one in for me. If I was in the middle of working on this and went to work on something else, I could simply go up and say, right, now change to another project, and it would clear it all out and load up the new stuff for me. So it's kind of nice and helps you to be tidy from that point of view. What I'm actually wanting to do is exploit its ability to hook me up to Git. I do have Git installed on this computer, so it's there in my options. Yes, please go ahead and initialize a new repository for me. And okay, slightly annoying that it wants to restart RStudio. It does, so it does. I'm not really discussing tonight what Git is and how it works. I'm assuming that you're either familiar with source control systems and can go and find out about it yourself, or you're kind of not, in which case I couldn't possibly tell you enough because I don't understand enough about it in 10 minutes to explain it to you. If you're interested in chatting about it afterwards, I'm more than happy to talk about it, and I know there are some Git experts in the audience who could answer all the questions I can't. But realistically, I installed it on my machine myself. I got it going by myself. You don't need to be a wizard to figure out how it works. I'm sure I don't use it to its full capabilities. I know I don't need to, but it does what I need it to do. So there's a absolutely free version of all the Git documentation on the web, and in fact they point out to you that you can, if you wish, buy a dead trees version from Amazon. So they obviously would rather that you didn't. And installing it is the second or third chapter, and on a Mac you just download the image, and on Windows it's the same. So it really is really simple. It's in a package, point and click, and it's installed. And then it just kind of sits in the background until you actually use it. So we see that now I've restarted. I've picked up my Melbourne demo rproj file in my file directory, which comes from opening the project, and I've picked up a tab for Git. So it's picked up all my folder structure and all my files, and is ready there for me to now push to my local repository. So what I actually don't want to do is push everything. So I'm just going to take my git ignore file, my top level git ignore file, and just say, actually, realistically, I don't want to keep source control over my data. I'm not interested in doing it over my logs file, and I'm not interested in doing it over my cache, which I'll talk about a little later. And that's just to make sure that I'm not, I personally want to keep my data files secure some other way. I'm usually getting them from somebody else's SQL server or whatever. So I'm not interested in using Git to help me do that. And it just makes the repository a little smaller, so that's fine. So now I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, everything that's here, yes, I want to stage, and it's putting it, it's adding it for me. I wish there was a select all button, but as far as I can tell, there's not. Very annoying. And I go ahead and commit. So it's saying to me, all right, this is all the stuff you're about to put in. You're really happy with that? Yes, I am. I'll be a nice, tidy person. And put in, whoops, which I can't spell. And there you go. It's gone ahead, and it's created a Git repository on my local machine. Now, so far that gives me version control. So if I do something stupid and change a file and break something really bad, I can always roll back to a previous version. Hasn't yet actually given me anything off my machine. So it hasn't given me what I really want to use it for, which is, oh, my machine got stolen, but now at least I still have my code. So to do that, obviously if you're working in a distributed environment, you can use someone else's machine, or you've got a server or whatever. I usually rely on GitHub, which is the online environment. So I've got an account. Again, really, really easy to get yourself an account. I'm now going to hook up my version of Git on my local machine to the Git repository online. So I'm going to need to get the rest of my browser window back. I need to fix it on the side. Oh, alright, it's going to be a little annoying. Anyway, new repository. Alright. Good. Alright, so just the same name as I called it down on the other machine. Now, this really doesn't work so well with the low-res screen, but okay. Alright. So, the really nice thing about this one I love about GitHub is you just go, alright, this is all a bit confusing. I scroll down to, oh look, that's what I need. I want to push an existing repository from the command line because I've created the repository down on my own machine rather than creating it up here on GitHub, and I just want to push it up. So I take my first line, and it's kind of nice if you go to the more option and you pick up a shell. And yes, you could just start the shell on the terminal, but it puts it in the right directory for you if you start it from there. So that's, you know, a little bit less typing. So essentially, I'm just saying, I'm invoking Git, and I'm saying, all right, I'm doing a remote add. I'm calling where I'm adding it to origin, and then this is the URL of what that origin thing is. That's fine. And then get to the second line that it also gives me. Try to type. Okay, is push. That takes a little longer. Okay. And you can hook it up so that it saves your username and password and all, and you don't have to do this again, but I just thought I would demo it as you will see it before you get clever and adapt it. And it's done. I think that's neat. It's very easy. So, if we now go back up onto GitHub and click onto code, it's actually replicated my folder structure, it's got my commit message, and it tells me that I created this all 3 minutes ago. So that's now sitting there, and as long as I remember to commit and push, I will have an online backed up version of this, and I can trust to GitHub to look after it rather than trusting to myself and, you know, whether I lose my machine or it dies or whatever. So that's one step along the way. So put that to one side and pop back to ProjectTemplate. Mildly annoying, it's restarted RStudio for me, so I need to reload my library. Good. Okay. Am I in the right directory? I should be. Yes, I am. Okay, cool. So I've created it, and the next step is easy as it is just load project. Okay, so it isn't doing much yet because we haven't given it much to do. What it is doing that is a little bit, can be kind of interesting to have a look at and a poke with is that it's basically created, oops, non-function variable. So config is just the first list in this object, and it's got the helper function here. It doesn't look very interesting right now, but we'll come back to it later and look, and you'll see that it picks up the information as you add more data and as you add more scripts. It picks it up all there, so it's all sitting in your project info variable, which is, I think, is kind of nice. So if we scroll back up just for a sec, so the first thing it did is load the project configuration. Fine, it's not very interesting. The second thing it says is auto-loading helper functions. And we see, ah yes, okay, over here under functions, I've got helper.function. Now that's a stub, and that's not surprising because that just came along with the project. But it sits down here in the lib directory. So basically the idea of the lib directory, as it is in software engineering, is anything that you write once and reuse many times, stick it in here, and then use that instead of replicating your code again and again and again. So I like that because it forces me to be a little bit more disciplined in what I do. So I will go across here and get something that I created earlier. I'm certainly not going to sit here and code it. Pop those in there. And now I've got a couple more functions. So I will just reload the project. And now it says, oh yes, okay, I can see you've got a few more than one up script, and now I've got my functions which will actually be a little bit more useful to me. So they're sitting there, and they're ones that I would expect to copy from project to project and analysis to analysis. So that's lib. So that's what you would kind of, the idea of what you would do with lib. So any functions that you wanted to reuse. So if you don't like the definition of square and you want to do your own, or you don't like the definition of standard deviation or whatever, and you've got your own personal one, you can stick it in there. Next thing it does is it says auto-loading data, and of course there actually isn't any for it to auto-load yet, but that says, okay, let's go and have a look at the data directory. There's nothing in there, that's fine. I'll go up to my pre-prepared one and grab some data. And what I rather love about this is, I think this is what really drew me to ProjectTemplate in the first place. We've got a lot of different kinds of data in here, so I've gone and, off the web, to be honest. I found some SPSS files, SATA files, there's a MySQL database in there, there's this one here, which is actually, it's just a pointer to a file, so it's actually going to go and download it. And yes, this is going to go and get it off localhost because I didn't want something else that could break during the demo, but you could actually send it off wherever you wanted to get your file from, whatever place you were grabbing it from. It's all sitting there. As you can see, we've got no data in our workspace at the moment. And that's it. Wow. So it just did all of that for me. And for me, for the kind of work I do, that's great, because that just saves me a heck of a lot of typing. I just dump it in there and it will automatically pick it up. Love it. So but initially I was really impressed, and then I went, oh, stink. Look at this one. Geocoded.items is only one variable. That doesn't sound right. Sure enough, it's not right. So it's using the defaults for all the loaders, and the default for loading a .txt file is to use tab separated. So I thought, oh, well, that sucks because I use pipe separation a lot, and this is not going to help me if I have to do something special and weird every time I want to load a pipe to limit a file. So I was a little depressed. And then I was really impressed because the fix is as easy as this, and I think it really speaks to that 80-20 rule. So I'm not going to try and remember, watch this, okay. No, I'm going to get this. I seem to put a typo in this every single time I do it, so bear with me. That's the trick, it's not a dot. So the only trick is you have to save it into the data directory, and there's no special name for it, it's just what I'm saving it myself. So you simply save the file that says, okay, this is how I want to load it. So yeah, this time you have to type it out, but for me, the fact that 8 of them load without any trouble, and I have to write a one-line file that I just pop in there to load the last one, I'm pretty happy with that. So bing. And it's loaded it now with my 16 observations. It's picked up the pipe. So I was really delighted when I discovered that, because now I know that 80% of the time it's going to work, and in the small percentage of the time where I have to do something a little bit clever, it's as easy as simply putting that one line into the data folder and leaving it there. So that made me very, very happy, I have to say. Now the other thing I like about the way he has done this is that if you notice, it's done another thing which is really useful for me because I get a little lazy. It's actually pushed me towards having a naming convention. So it's taken all my data file names and it's tried to impose a convention on them, as in something dot something. So I really like that. So I thought, well, that's really nice. What it hasn't done, and fair enough, it would be kind of a bit of a step too far, is it hasn't normalized the names within the files themselves. So, all right, fair enough, it's gotten me half the way there. The next thing I want to do then is maybe address that. So it hasn't normalized my stuff as much as I'd like to, and then that brings in the next folder piece of our folder structure. which is the munge directory. Now, I know the word munge and I really like it, but just in case it's not in common usage, it kind of means getting your data, messing around with it and making it nice and standardized. I thought this was a word that everyone used until one of my colleagues said, what on earth are you talking about? So this is the data munging folder. So the idea in the data munging folder is you're basically doing all your data pre-processing. So everything that you shouldn't have to do because data should be perfect and come in really pretty, but it actually isn't. His idea is that you put that into your munging folder so that that data prep step is quite separate from your data analysis step. The only trick here in the naming conventions, this is obviously just a stub file, is that they execute sequentially. So if you have a whole bunch of files that you've written and it's important that one of them runs first, you just need to make sure that's called O1 and the next one's called O2, the next one's called O3. So again, something I prepared earlier. Now I've got a data munging file which actually goes in and, according to the Google R-star guide, renames all my variable names to line up with convention. Let me clean up a little bit. So now I load project again. And now after munging it says, okay, yep, I've run your pre-processing step. And if we go have a look at the names, yep, it's normalized all my names for me. So that's the general idea of what the munging directory is for. And being a good coder, I'll now go away and say, okay, I'm actually just going to go and commit those changes to my Git repository. So super. Okay. There's a bit more munging I want to do, but when I first tried this, I discovered that so far ProjectTemplate hasn't loaded all the libraries I want. But that's okay, because there's a nice, easy way of doing that too. If you pop into the config directory and open up global config, so reasonably self-explanatory, data loading is on, hash loading is on, logging is on. Excellent. Logging is off, and I'll leave logging off. Load libraries is off, so I'm going to put that onto on. By default, he's going to load this list of libraries. That looks okay to me because I know I'm going to need ggplot, but actually I don't need lubridate because I'm not working with dates tonight. And what I do need is tm, so I'll put that on and save it. Great, so it's now loaded all my libraries for me and asking it to compile, that's all fine. So I've got my libraries loaded in now. All right, let me go and grab my other munging files, preprocessing files, sorry. So now I've got 3 files, and again, this one either happens to be blank rows in that data, it's kind of messy, and so I'm just going through and taking them all out. So making it nice and clean, so it's not going to trip me out later. And that's kind of a bugger. It took kind of a long time to run. And I think, oh, I don't really like that very much. And it happens again, and it takes rather a long time to run. And the reason is because in my third data munging file, I'm actually taking one of the data files, which is a whole bunch of book reviews, and I'm actually creating a term document matrix out of that. And that does take a while, particularly on, it's not like it's hooked up to a fancy server. It's kind of an old machine. But what it does mean is he has of course thought of this because I'm sure John does a lot more complicated stuff, and it introduces the idea of a cache folder. So basically, and again, I really like the way this helps me separate out my thinking. In my data prep, if I've done some stuff that I know that realistically I'm not going to need to do that again unless my data gets refreshed, I can then actually say, okay, so all of that is done. Now I actually want to get onto the interesting bits. I'm going to cache that data. And yes, I know, and everyone knows you can write out your data sets to .r data files. Again, this just gives you a really, really easy way of doing it. So I'm going to cache. The only thing I always forget is you have to put quotes around them when you cache them. It breaks later on if I don't get this right, so bear with me. And there I go, forgetting my quotes again. So basically it's gone and written those out as our data files for me. So now instead of what I often used to do, which is kind of kludgy, I wrote them out as text files and then pulled them back in, it's just done that for me nicely. I don't have to remember the syntax and it's all sitting there. So now, hang on, I'll just be tidy. Get that out of my way so I don't get upset about it. Now if I pop back to my config file, say, okay, I actually going to turn my munging off now. So I've got my cache loading on, so that's all good. And now, fingers crossed, when I load the project, there's no munging step. We don't have that time delay and everything's loaded in. And if you have a look, we've picked up the corpus, the DTM, and my name normalized naming conventions and all of that now. I don't have to run it every time I do it, it all just comes in and it pulls it in from the cache, which I kind of like. So, just realising I'm not keeping an eye on the time. Okay. We've stepped through the config, so essentially what's in config, because that's the only thing you use config for. We've had a quick look at putting your helper files into lib, storing your data in your data file, the idea of doing your pre-processing and keeping that all separate from your analysis and putting that into your munging, and then anything that really takes significant amount of processing power and you don't really want to have to do again and again, caching that into the cache directory. So sort of the last function that I just find really, really helpful, and it's sort of the last one I want to step through tonight, is actually the tests directory, because it's another thing that I find so easy not to do and so easy to skip if you're in a hurry and then you do something major and you break something and you wish you hadn't skipped tests. But so when we loaded ProjectTemplate, I'm sure you remember, it's very exciting, it loaded the library test that along with it. So ProjectTemplate is very much built around keeping that functionality as a part of the core. Test that is written by Hadley Wickham, who's probably, I'm sure, well known to everyone in the audience, one of the sort of the leading lights in the R community in the States. And I think he says it pretty much better than I can. Testing's boring, testing's a pain, people don't do it. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. And he's based a lot of what he's done in the test that package on stuff that's done in the Ruby community and other sort of more hardcore software development places. He's got all of his stuff up on GitHub, the project's up there, so if you want to go and have a look, it's all there. And he has written a chat book, which steps you through how to get going with test that really, really well. I'm really going to only look at it at a really high level at the moment, so if you're not familiar with sort of the concepts of test-driven development, and I'm not going into that at all, but it is really well explained in Hadley's book. The one thing we will just have a quick look at, so I just walk through it really quickly, is the way he's built it up is hierarchical, and so you have an expectation, you group those expectations together into a test, and then those tests together into a context. So he more talks about using it to test R packages, which is what he spends a lot of his time doing, right? So he steps through how he wrote the string R package and how he uses his own package test that to make sure that his package string R works. So I'm not going to go as far as context, but I have it just a quick look at how you write an expectation and then grouping those expectations into a sort of a coherent logical set. There are, I think he's got, let's does he say? 11 built-in expectations. We're only going to use a couple of them, but essentially he's got an equals and is identical to, is equivalent to. So it's written in a very human-readable way, as we'll have a look at in a sec. So this one's just a stub. So this is a single expectation. We expect that 1 equals 1, which of course it does. And the only thing I'd say is I'm pretty sure this is a small bug in ProjectTemplate, because as far as I can tell from playing around with it, you actually have to have the files that you want to execute in the test directory starting with the word test. That's how test that is written, so that you can have test files intermingled with other files in your folder. As far as I can tell from poking around it for a while, that file there doesn't actually execute unless you rename it. So I've written a slightly more interesting test file. And I have called it test, so it should execute. So this is probably a fairly basic usage of testing. I'm not into writing R functions at this point, but I actually find it really, really useful, because I usually get my data delivered to me by people who've extracted it from nasty warehouses and all sorts of stuff, and a lot of the time they don't smoke test the data they give me, so I find this really useful as a smoke test to very quickly say to someone, well, that's nice, but you gave me dates in a different format from you gave them to me last time, and you know, you're passing me strings where I'm expecting integers and all the rest of it. So that's how I'm demonstrating it today. So the idea is, all right, all we've really done so far anyway is load data. So the idea of this test and these expectations is to test that the data has loaded as expected. So for us, I'm going to say, all right, a little basic, but I'm going to say, all right, I expect that local reviews has 5 columns, as indeed it does, and I'm going to expect that outdoor furniture assets has 8 attributes, as indeed it does. And I'm also then going to expect that license premises license number is coming across as an integer, because I'm sure you've all had this situation where sometimes it comes across as an integer and then someone passes to you as a character string and everything breaks. So that's my test. Not very exciting, but really useful and save you quite a lot of time, even at this level. And it's as simple as now you say, good, please test project. And it does. And the only indication you have that it has worked, with nothing broke, is 3 dots. So test that gives you a dot per expectation that passes. And if you go and read his documentation, in some IDEs, I guess, it gives you coloured dots. But in RStudio, you just get black dots. But that's great, because most of the time you just want your tests to pass, and you just don't want them to really be in your face. And in actual fact, you can go and suppress it. So instead of getting a row of dots for every expectation, you just get 1 dot. So, you know, as you get more and more and you don't want it in your face and you really only want it to tell you if it has a problem, you can hide it away. I'm just going to pause it to fail so that we can see what happens if it does fail. Good. So it's popped me up, nope, you had an error, and your error was that. And just so you can kind of get the idea of how it goes along. And then it said, oh no, you had, so your first expectation failed, your second passed, your third failed, and these are what your failures were. And I know this has already saved me quite a lot of time. And then if you wanted to add another, if I can type another expectation, it's as simple as, so go across to location info and say, oh look, with that zip code now, I wouldn't be at all surprised if some clever person at some point decided to start passing me zip as an integer, because they think, oh well, it's a number, right, so I should pass it as an integer. Of course, it's not a number that I want to actually do any numeric calculation on, so it's in actual fact at the moment a character, and I want to keep it that way. So, and no, the spaces aren't required, I just thought it made it easier for you guys to read it. So, we should now pick up a 4th dot. Yes, excellent. So there we are. So that's just the general idea of how the test functionality works. If you haven't come across it before, that 5 minutes isn't going to help you much. I think it's great. I find it really, really useful. I have a lot of respect for Hadley Wickham, and I'm sure that this will stay around and will be more and more widely used, so I really recommend have a play with it. ProjectTemplate gives you a really easy way to have a play with it because it is so automatic. All you need to do is write some test functions and stick them in that directory, and it takes care of all the heavy lifting for you. But if you were using it outside of ProjectTemplate, you just need to go and read through Hadley's documentation, and he explains how he uses it, which is in a slightly less automated way. Trust me, we're nearly done. So I just want to have a little more of a discussion around how Git and GitHub are working for us. So I just go and commit. What did we do? Added a test. And actually, I'm really interested that I changed the config file. However, I did add a test file. That was pretty interesting. Okay, cool. So you can now sort of, because we've done a number, you can also just pop across into this tab and you can have a look at, this is, I think, another reason why I really, really like using Git, is it just kind of does your logging for you. You don't need to be writing down, this is what I did when I did it, this is what I did when I did it. As long as you're disciplined about putting in a little comment when it asks you to put in a little comment, I think that's just so lovely that that's there now, and when I, wake up and can't remember what I did, I can actually go back and have a look at it. And if you want to, you can actually, it's really got a lot of detail. You can go down as far as you like, and it steps you through what you changed, what went in, all the rest of it. So this is where you can start to see that if you made a mistake or you broke something, you could then roll back to a previous version and it would just take away all those changes for you. So, really the only last one I wanted to talk about was, so this is sort of the automate the boring bits, and that was kind of the idea of my talk, but the idea of ProjectTemplate is that once you've done all that, so you've taken advantage of data and cache and testing and all those sorts of things, all your actual analysis files should sit in the source directory. And here is one. This is just the demo one. The only trick is that all your source files have to start with those two lines. Okay, so that's that you just stick in library ProjectTemplate and then load.project. So that one is not interesting. I'll just go and grab one that I wrote. So the idea here is you've done all your data processing, you've done all that, you've loaded all your data, you've tested at least your data. Obviously you'd want to test your analysis as well. Now you can get on with doing the actual interesting bit of doing your analysis, and we'll keep it quite separate so that hopefully a lot of that data munging and data pre-processing you'll be able to use again. Analysis perhaps will be more specific to what you were actually doing at the time, a little bit less reusable, but it's partitioned off. Oops, come on. Don't me now. Okay. So, okay, it's not very fancy analysis, it's going to create a graph, but here we go. And so I've got my first two lines, so library ProjectTemplate and load.project. There's my nice graph. And then just, I guess, a very sort of a hat tip to some of the directories we haven't covered. So doc, obviously, is where you should put your documentation that you should be writing, reports, any reports that you're writing, and the graphs directory where he's suggesting that you just split off anything that you're actually producing in terms of pictures. So I'm using file path graphs, and the plot that's produced by my analysis will end up in the graphs directory, just to be nice and tidy. So, whoops, we'll do one more commit. We'll say edit analysis file. Okay. Now, anyone who knows much about source control will be saying, well, she's committing, but she's not pushing, so she's not actually taking care of using the backup on GitHub, and that's true. So far I've been committing to my local repository, but I haven't been replicating those changes up to my online repository, which is why it's telling me your branch is ahead of Origin Master by 4 commits. Okay, that's fine. Now I actually do want to go ahead and push. So now I'm actually pushing up to GitHub. Is that right? Username, yes. changes that can take a little while. So now I'm no longer out of sync with Origin. I've pushed it up there. So if we pop up and have a quick look back to my version of GitHub, okay. So here it is, and it's got it's picked up all our history for us. So it's saying, oh yeah, okay, and these you can see all my commit messages going in here. Added some helper files, added preprocessing scripts. It's got all my timestamps, so you know I can remember everything that I was doing before. If you were working in a team, you could also take advantage of some of the more advanced features of Git, which I don't. We did change this a few times, and I rather like this idea, even though I personally don't need to use it. But basically it goes in there and it tells you everyone who changed it, whenever they changed it, and what they did. So you can go and finger somebody for breaking your code. And obviously me, I just have to go and finger myself, because it's just me doing it all the time. I'd say, Kendra, go and fix the code. But you can see that if you were using this in a team, then you could at least be able to track back to people and say, hey, look, you really need to help me fix this because you broke it. So. And I've certainly seen those discussions go on in software engineering firms, not so much in data analysis firms. And I guess for me that sort of brings me full circle to why I think this is important and why I wanted to talk about it tonight, is because I see data analytics as a professional field being now where software engineering was maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And I believe that we will have to pick up a lot of the disciplines of software engineering if we're going to move data analytics into a really, really commercial place. So I work almost exclusively with commercial organizations, and the habits that I see going on in data analytics teams would not be accepted on the other side of the fence, which is the software engineering. You know, it's just incredible to me, and I think that for us not to all be offshored and our jobs outsourced and all the rest of it, we will need to pick up the professional discipline of software engineers. That's where I see us moving, and so that's, I guess, why I wanted to talk about this tonight, because I think that those views are shared by a lot of people in the data analytics community, but because a lot of us don't have backgrounds as software engineers and haven't had exposure to it, we see it as really hard, when in actual fact what I hope I've kind of demonstrated tonight is it's really not. You can hook into the infrastructure that's been built by our peers in software engineering really, really easily, and sort of stand on their shoulders to get more professional in those areas. So that is pretty much what I wanted to do. There's just one more thing I wanted to show you, and that is that it's also built very much so that if you've built a project within RStudio or your own personal editor of preference, it's now designed really nicely that you can run your entire analysis from the command line, which I just think is rather cool. Where am I? There. So I'm just changing it into my folder, and I say, okay, just go ahead and run R. So I've changed it into the top level directory of my project. So I want it to go and look in the source directory, which is where I place my analysis file. Let's see if I can spell just one last time. And I think that that is really rather beautiful. That with just those 2 lines, which is why you have to put those 2 lines on top of your source file. So just those 2 lines, it has gone in, it has loaded all the directories you need, it has loaded the helper scripts, it has loaded it's loaded your libraries, it's done your pre-processing, it's loaded your cache data, it's run your tests. Well, it probably hasn't run your tests. All done, and it's written your image out to your graphs folder. And just to confirm that it really has, It really did. There it is. And there it is. And that is all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening, and apologies again about running that 10 minutes off at the beginning.
Did anyone have any questions for Kendra?
Come on, no questions mean a bad talk, so don't make me think I did a bad talk. Yes, at the back.
I wonder if you had any comments about managing security and confidentiality.
Oh, so to be honest, no. I almost always leave that to the people who build the data sources for me. So in the work I do at the moment, at least, I assume that if I can get to the data, I'm allowed to. So no, I really just haven't looked at that at all. Sorry. I'm sorry, I think it was one at the back.
Yeah, do you have any suggestions about how to share code across projects, like your library code?
Over and above just using...
Over and above just copying and pasting?
No, and again, that really reflects the kind of work I do at the moment. But I'm sure that you could use Git for that, passing it around. Yeah, so no, and I think it's a really good question because it answers that question of, you know, if you want your team to be more disciplined, how do you move towards that? One thing I do use to help me do that, really just things that I know that I'll find hard to write again, is I use another functionality of GitHub, which is called Gist. So Gist just helps you save scraps of code, and for me it tends more to be scraps of code. I'm not writing really, really big analyses that live for years, but some of the things I've written that I think I'm never going to remember that again, I just put them as a gist, and then I have my own Gist library. Now, you can do that for free on GitHub. Everything's public, which doesn't bother me because I'm not using client-sensitive stuff. I'm just writing the structure of my code myself. But all of the functionality that GitHub allows you to have publicly, if you pay for it, you can take it behind a wall. So as a small team, you could, for instance, use something like Gist to share your pieces of code around like that. I'm sure there's a better answer that you'd need to talk to a software engineer about. Sorry?
Yeah, she answered the question.
Oh, it's the same question. Okay. Yeah.
If in your source you have like R code and then you have like a C code or something called from, will load project be able to compile that?
That is a really good question, to which I do not know the answer. The only thing I would say is I know that the guy who wrote ProjectTemplate, it's certainly by no means his only language. As you may know, he's writing Julia at the moment, so I suspect that it possibly does, or if it doesn't, you could put it on the Google groups and somebody would tell you what's going on. Yeah, he's kind of stopped maintaining it, unfortunately. And like I said at the beginning, I don't think it's a permanent answer. I think it's a great way to train yourself. But I'm sure he would tell you really quickly.
Thank you.
I've just, if anyone is interested, I just thought it was kind of cool that our city streets are outlined with rubbish bins and information pillars. As far as I can see, we're right about here, because this bit in the middle here is the pedestrian mall, where Burke Street turns into no cars. But I'm not quite sure what all the hoops and horse troughs are over here. Somewhere there was hoops and horse troughs, which is all a bit strange. But, yes.
Yeah, I've always been wondering, it's probably someone you started using a little bit before ProjectTemplate came about, so I spent a couple of years trying to kind of get to something a little bit like ProjectTemplate in my own workflow. Yeah, I can sort of see what you're saying. Like, by using ProjectTemplate, it's almost showing you some good practices.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, I guess you evolve a workflow as well. And so I'm curious your thoughts about the extent to which ProjectTemplate constrains you in any way, or whether it's all pluses, and if it doesn't do exactly what you want, you just customize it. And whether the sort of additional, I wouldn't call it bloat, but just there's extra folders,
for sure.
and maybe even an extra point of failure. Like, I'm just wondering,
I think that
there's a few trade-offs there, and I'm just wondering your
how
thoughts on the balance.
What you do is. Realistically, most of the commercial teams I work with, they don't, particularly when they're learning R, which is a pretty new tool for a lot of commercial teams, they're not using it in the way that you probably use it as, you know, in your academic practice. I suspect that if I was 100% of my time doing this, I wouldn't use it. But I do think it's a really, really good way to learn and to sort of introduce yourself to that discipline if you don't already have it. I mean, the extra folders and stuff, you can delete them, it works perfectly fine. It works for me, it works for the type of work I do, it works for the type of work I see, for instance, commercial marketing teams do. I suspect it doesn't work so well for people who use R in a more complicated way. Although, interestingly enough, it was created by a guy who absolutely does use R very much for a personal pursuit of single analyst projects. So I think the answer really is I haven't used it enough to come up against its annoyances, but I'm sure that they're there.
If I can ask one other question, do you ever use it with any document, like with like reproducible documents, or is it mainly to produce graphs and tables? I'm just trying to understand what the output of this is.
Yeah,
is
so you
it
can
more
hook it-
documents, or is it more PDFs or of
So you
images?
can hook
or?
it into Sweave and all that sort of things, which I must admit I haven't used very much. Realistically, for the work I do, very little of anything that R would put out would be anything I would take to a client. So I would tend to more use this as my, I've got it all there, sitting there in graphs that mean something to me and tables that mean something to me. I would still have to do quite a lot of translation putting this into, realistically, PowerPoint packs. But that's just the nature of what I do for a job, unfortunately. Yeah. This has to be a nice question, Eugen, not a nasty question.
Just curious as how you use ProjectTemplate actually, because I realized you skipped the SRC folder.
No, I didn't.
SRC.
That's where I put my create graph file.
Oh, is that
So that's
sorry,
so source. So yeah, so the idea of the source folder is simply anything that's truly an analysis. So that just comes from software engineering. They just call it source.
Yeah.
Anything that's the analysis type file, you put it there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Okay.
Right at the end, though, you're probably going to sleep. Yeah. All right, I'm hanging around, so if anyone's got any more questions, feel free to come up and have a chat. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.